Aisha stepped into the busy airport with a bright smile on her face. She held her small rolling suitcase in one hand and her boarding pass in the other. The large glass windows let in warm sunlight, making the polished floor shine. Fresh breeze from the automatic doors brushed against her cheeks, carrying the faint smell of coffee and baked bread. She had been waiting for this trip all month. Her cousin Zara had invited her to spend the weekend in a city far from home. Aisha could almost taste the sweet date cookies they would bake together and hear the laughter that would fill Zara's cozy apartment as she walked toward the check-in counter. She glanced around at the other travelers. Some families pushed strollers. Some business people hurried along, staring at their phones. Aisha felt a gentle excitement in her chest. She adjusted the strap of her small backpack and smoothed down the skirt of her favorite bright dress. It was a cheerful yellow with white dots, a gift from her grandmother. Whenever she wore it, she felt confident and happy. Today was a special day, and she wanted to feel her best. She reached the counter and smiled at the airline staff. A kind woman with dark hair scanned Aisha's passport and boarding pass. "Have a nice trip," she said, handing back the documents. "Enjoy your weekend." "Thank you," Aisha replied softly, her voice warm and calm. She picked up her suitcase and backpack and headed for security. She placed her things on the conveyor belt, slipped off her light cardigan, and walked through the scanner. Soft beep welcomed her on the other side. She put her cardigan back on, collected her things, and walked past rows of seats where people waited for their flights. The boarding gate was busy. Families waved their young children to sit down. Travelers read newspapers and magazines. Some listened to music on earphones. Aisha found her gate number on the large screen above and settled into a chair near the window. From here, she could see the airplane that would carry her to her cousin's city. It was a white jet with the airline's logo shining on its tail. She tapped her foot lightly, watching the ground crew load bags and fuel. Her mind drifted to the fun weekend ahead. She imagined herself talking to Zara late at night, sipping tea and sharing old stories. She pictured their walk around the cities. Quiet streets, the tall buildings lit up against the evening sky. Aisha could even feel the soft breeze on her skin as they strolled past cafes and small shops. After a few minutes, the gate agent announced that boarding would begin soon. A line formed and Aisha joined it. She gave her boarding pass to the agent, smiled politely, and walked down the jetway. The inside of the plane smelled faintly of disinfectant and warm upholstery. The flight attendant at the door greeted her with a nod. "Good afternoon, welcome aboard," the attendant said. "Good afternoon," Aisha replied, returning the nod. She walked down the aisle, passing rows of empty seats. She chose the window seat in row 16, the same seat she had chosen when she booked her ticket weeks ago. From this seat, she would have a clear view of the clouds and the landscape below. She placed her backpack under the seat in front of her and lifted her suitcase into the overhead bin. Then she sat down, pressed her bright dress flat against her legs, and looked out the small window. The attendant, who stood in the aisle, watched Aisha for a moment. She studied the neat way Aisha had placed her bag. She noted the smooth curve of Aisha's hair, pulled back into a simple bun. She briefly saw Aisha's gentle face, calm and composed. But the attendant did not see friendliness or excitement. Instead, she felt uneasy. Something about Aisha's quiet confidence seemed off to her. The attendant felt that Aisha was too relaxed. She thought Aisha might not follow instructions if asked. "Excuse me?" the attendant said, walking down the aisle toward Aisha. She cleared her throat. "Miss, could you move your bag further back? It's too close to the exit row." Aisha looked up, surprised. She blinked her large brown eyes. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said. She reached for her backpack, lifted it, and placed it neatly under the seat in front of her. "Is this okay?" The attendant's face remained tight. "Yes, but make sure it does not block the path," she said. Her tone was firm. She turned and walked away without waiting for Aisha's answer. Aisha settled back into her seat, her heart beating a bit faster. She wondered why the attendant felt uneasy. She tried to shake off the feeling and picked up her phone to send a quick message to Zara. "On my way, see you soon." She pressed send. A small smile returned to her face. She glanced out the window, watching the terminal buildings fade as other passengers boarded behind her. A few minutes passed. More attendants walked up and down the aisle, checking seat belts and handing out little pillows. Aisha watched them, feeling the gentle hum of the airplane's engines. She closed her eyes and thought about the soft beds at Zara's home. Soon, she would fall asleep on one of those beds and wake up to the smell of fresh coffee and warm bread. She could already taste the crunchy date cookies. Suddenly, she heard the attendant who had spoken to her before on the intercom. Flight 16 is ready to depart. Please return to your seats and fasten your seat belts. The plane's engines grew louder. Aisha slipped the belt across her hips and clicked it in place. She looked around and saw other passengers doing the same. A small boy next to her struggled with his belt. His mother helped him. Aisha leaned back and watched the ground crew move the jetway away. The plane hummed and began to roll forward. She felt a gentle push into her seat. The city outside grew distant. The airplane rose smoothly, cutting through the bright sky. She closed her eyes again, feeling the soft vibration beneath her. A while, the plane leveled off. Passengers reached for the overhead lights and bored smiles passed around. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Aisha took a deep breath, relaxed her shoulders, and reached for the air vent above. She adjusted it so that a thin stream of cool air brushed against her face. She opened her eyes and looked out, below the fields. And buildings looked like a colorful puzzle. She recognized some shapes, roads, rivers, patches of trees. She felt a wave of calm wash over her. Everything seemed peaceful up here, far from noise and rush. A short time later, the same attendant, who had asked her to move her bag, returned. She stood in the aisle, her arms folded. She watched Aisha, as if waiting for something wrong. Aisha smiled politely, but the smile seemed to bother the attendant. The attendant took out her walkie-talkie and pressed a button. A faint click echoed. In Aisha's ear, Aisha wore her calm face, but inside she felt a flutter of worry. She did not know why the attendant was uneasy. She had done nothing wrong. She placed her hands on her lap and turned back to the window. Below, the old city looked like a tiny toy. She tried to feel the excitement of flying above the clouds, but then she heard the attendant's voice again, very low, almost a whisper. Uncooperative passenger. She said into her walkie, sits quietly, won't make eye contact, might cause trouble. Aisha's heart sank. She pressed her lips together. She did not understand why she was seen as a threat. She had always been polite and calm. Why did the attendant think she would not follow rules? She shook her head slightly and took out her water bottle. She lifted it to her lips and drank slowly. A fresh confidence returned. She would not let this ruin her trip. But the attendant did not leave. She watched Aisha's every move. When Aisha set her bottle down, the attendant stepped forward again. She cleared her throat. Miss, open your bag for me. Aisha blinked. Her heart beat faster. She looked up, meeting the attendant's eyes. She made her voice calm. Which bag would you like me to open? The small one under the seat, the attendant said. Her voice was strict. Open it now. Aisha felt a rush of heat in her cheeks. She thought of her grandmother's advice. Stay calm, speak softly, stand tall. She took a deep breath. All right, she said, unbuckling her seatbelt to reach the bag. She pulled it out carefully and unzipped the main compartment. Her books, the date cookies, and small gifts for Zara lay neatly inside. The attendant bent over and peered in. She frowned. She pulled out a thick school notebook. What's this? She asked. Aisha's voice was steady. It's my notebook. I'm studying history. I write notes. The attendant threw the notebook back in the bag. All right, she said. She closed the bag with extra force. Aisha felt her heart pound. She glanced at other passengers. Looked away. Some stared. She wished the flight would be over soon. Just then, the pilot's voice came over the speaker. Cabin crew, please prepare to hand over control of the cabin to the safety officers upon arrival. Report any passenger who resists instruction. Aisha's eyes widened. She felt a cold knot in her stomach. The attendant nodded at the pilots. Words and whispered into her walkie. Report, passenger, as uncooperative. Aisha's chest tightened. She sat back and folded her arms across her chest. A small tear escaped the corner of her eye. She closed them quickly. She tried to steady her breathing. She imagined the warm hug Zara would give her when she got off the plane. She pictured the kitchen filled with love and laughter. She could almost hear her cousin's voice saying, "I'm so happy you're here." The attendant walked away, but Aisha knew she had already made her report. A gentle ache settled in her heart. She squeezed her hands together. She would not cry now. Not until she saw the smiling face of the person who loved her most. ChatGPT said. Aisha sat very still as the flight attendant finished speaking to the pilot through her walkie-talkie. A soft hum filled the cabin as the plane glided at a smooth height above pale green fields dotted with white clouds. The other passengers shifted in their seats. No one spoke. The air felt heavy. Aisha's heart beat fast, but she kept her face calm and her hands folded neatly in her lap. Moments later, the cabin door behind her opened. 2 uniformed officers stepped. Inside, their polished shoes clicked on the floor as they moved down the aisle. One officer was tall and broad-shouldered, the other shorter with a kind face. They carried small notebooks in hand. Every eye in the cabin turned to watch them. Aisha watched them approach, her mouth dry. She took a steadying breath and slid her feet flat on the floor. She had learned long ago to face hard moments with quiet strength. The taller officer stopped in front of her seat. He folded his arms and looked down at her. The shorter one stood behind him, scanning the cabin. "Miss," the tall officer said, his voice low but firm. "I need to see your boarding pass again." "Step out into the aisle, please." Aisha nodded slowly. She unclicked her seat belt and stood. She pulled her small backpack from under the seat and held it in front of her. She looked straight at the tall officer's eyes. "Here's my boarding pass," she said, handing it to him. Her voice was calm, but she felt each word tighten in her throat. The taller officer took the pass and examined it under the cabin light. He frowned, then glanced at the pilot through the small glass partition. The pilot nodded. The officer turned. "Back to Aisha. You showed this once before. Why not again?" he asked. Aisha kept her gaze level. "I have it here because you asked," she replied softly. "I will show it any time you need." A hush followed. The shorter officer stepped forward and spoke in a gentler tone. "Ma'am, please don't be upset. We are only doing our job." He offered a small, polite smile. Aisha noticed the kindness in his voice, but she saw how the taller officer's jaw stayed tight. The tall officer cleared his throat. "We have a report of an uncooperative passenger," he said, his gaze flicking to the flight attendant. "We must make sure everything is okay." Aisha's belly tightened. She felt a wave of heat rise to her cheeks. She glanced at the flight attendant, whose eyes met hers with what felt like suspicion. Aisha turned back to the officers. "I am cooperating," she said, her voice firm. "I have done nothing wrong," some passengers whispered. A mother comforted her small child. A businessman folded his newspaper. An elderly woman looked at Aisha with concern. Aisha kept her shoulders back and her head high. She knew that people were watching, and she did not want to give them reason to judge her. The tall officer folded the boarding pass and tucked it into his pocket. Then he motioned with his head. "Please step into the aisle so we can ask a few more questions." His tone was ordering. Aisha nodded again, slid her backpack strap over her shoulder, and moved into the aisle, stepping carefully so she would not bump into the other seats. The shorter officer gently placed a hand on her forearm. "Just a few questions," he said quietly. Aisha looked up at him and saw genuine courtesy in his eyes. She offered him a small, grateful smile. "Of course," she said. The tall officer turned his back to the aisle door and whispered into his radio. A faint click sounded. Aisha felt her pulse hammer. She thought of her grandmother's words, "Speak only truth, stand only strong." She stood tall, her bright yellow dress inches from the aisle, her dark hair shining under the cabin light. The taller officer cleared his throat. "Why were you unwilling to make eye contact with the flight attendant when she spoke to you?" His question felt strange. Aisha blinked. "I was not unwilling. I was focused on listening carefully." She replied calmly, "I respect the flight attendant. I was just a bit startled." He frowned and looked down his nose. "Is that so?" Aisha nodded. "I did not mean to be rude." I was surprised by the request, so I paused to hear clearly. She spoke honestly, without anger or fear. The shorter officer stepped forward again. "Do you understand why we have to be cautious? There have been a few incidents lately." He lowered his voice further. "Passengers who refuse to follow instructions can endanger others." He paused, then added quietly, "We want to make sure everything is safe." Aisha nodded. She folded her hands over her stomach and spoke with gentle care. "I understand. I want everyone to be safe too. I'll follow any instruction you ask." Behind her, the flight attendant watched with tight lips. Aisha felt her throat close. She wondered if her calm words would be enough. The taller officer glanced at his partner. The shorter one gave a slight nod. The tall officer swallowed and said, "We will need to check your bag again." He indicated the small backpack. "Open it, please." Aisha felt her chest tighten, but she did not hesitate. She unzipped the pack and carefully pulled out each item. First came her history notebook, then a paperback book, then the little pouch of date cookies for her cousin, and then a small wrapped gift. She laid each item on the seat beside her so the officers could see clearly. The taller officer reached out and lifted the notebook. He flipped through a few pages. "Looks normal," he said. He lifted the book, the cookies, the gift. He frowned at each, but found nothing. He set them down and looked at Aisha. "Why did the flight attendant report you as uncooperative?" he asked. Aisha looked down at the polished floor. She felt tears prickle in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She thought of her cousin Zara's gentle voice, reminding her to speak in truth. She felt a quiet strength rise inside her chest. She looked up at the officers. "I do not know," she said. She seemed uneasy, but I only did what I was told. I moved my bag. I opened my backpack. I showed my pass. I spoke politely. The shorter officer sighed softly. He looked at Aisha with pity. "I am sorry," he said. "Wrong." He glanced at the taller officer, who was still silent. The taller officer closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them again, his expression had softened slightly. "All right," the tall officer said. "You may return to your seat." He pointed to the space between rows 15 and 16. Aisha nodded gratefully. She stepped back into the seat and sat down slowly. She clicked her seatbelt back in place and put her backpack under the seat. Her hands trembled a little, but she tried to stay calm. The tall officer said to his partner, "Keep an eye on her." Then he turned and walked back toward the cabin door. The shorter officer lingered a moment. He looked at Aisha's bright dress and then smiled gently. "Thank you for cooperating," he said quietly. Then he joined his partner and walked away. Aisha leaned back against her seat. She watched the officers step off the plane when the cabin door opened. Her chest felt tight. Her mind spun with questions. Why had this happened? Why had she been seen as a threat? She reached for her phone but hesitated. She did not want to bring her cousin worry before she even arrived. Instead, she closed her eyes and pressed her palm to her chest. A steady warmth glowed in her hand, and she touched the memory of her grandmother's advice. Stay calm and choose truth. She let herself breathe slowly, in and out, feeling the rise and fall of her chest. The plane hummed along above the patchwork earth below. Aisha thought of her cousin Zara waiting at the gate. She imagined Zara's wide smile when she saw her. She pictured the two of them walking side by side out of the airport into the warm afternoon air. She could almost feel Zara's soft hug, almost taste the date cookies she would bake that evening. A small smile grew on Aisha's lips. The flight attendant passed by Aisha's row. Their eyes met. Aisha nodded in a quiet greeting. The attendant looked away sharply. Aisha felt a small sting, but she held her calm smile. She knew she had done all she could. Compassion and honesty would always guide her. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Some passengers unbuckled and stood to stretch. Aisha moved her hands to her lap and picked up her history notebook. She opened to the next blank page and began to write. I faced a difficult moment today. I stayed calm. I spoke truth. I felt fear, but I also felt strength. She paused and wrote a line for Zara. "You will know soon. I will see you soon," she wrote. The plane's gentle vibration seemed almost comforting. She watched the clouds drift by her window, white and soft against the blue. She felt her heart slow, her mind clear. She knew the rest of the journey would be smooth from here. She had stood tall, shown respect, and kept her dignity. Aisha closed her notebook and placed it gently on the seat beside her. She leaned back and let out a soft sigh around her. The cabin felt quiet again, busy but calm. She pressed the air vent above her, letting a gentle breeze brush her face. Then she gazed down at the world below, ready to continue her journey, hopeful that soon she would be reunited with her family. The plane began its descent, and the cabin lights dimmed to a soft glow. Outside the window, the city below looked larger now, its buildings and streets drawing closer. Aisha felt the gentle tilt as the pilots guided the aircraft down. She tightened her seatbelt and leaned forward, resting her elbow on the armrest. Her heart pounded, but she kept her face calm. She thought of Zara waiting for her, and she tried to focus on the happy reunion ahead. Just then, the cabin door at the front opened again. A hush swept through the rows of seats. A tall man in a dark suit and polished shoes stepped in, walked with quiet confidence down the aisle. His salt and pepper hair was neat, and his eyes shone with purpose. The officers near the cockpit straightened their posture. The flight attendant who had spoken to Aisha earlier swallowed hard. Everyone sensed that this man had authority. The man paused in the middle of the aisle, looked at the officers and the attendant. His voice was calm but carried weight. "Excuse me," he said. "Is there a problem on this flight?" The tall officer stepped forward. He cleared his throat. "Sir, we have a report of a passenger refusing to follow instructions." He pointed to Aisha. "We are checking too. Make sure there is no threat." The man's eyes softened as he looked at Aisha. He reached into his jacket pocket and showed an ID badge. "I am David Johnson. I am the CEO of this airline. That young woman there is my daughter." A sigh passed through the cabin. Passengers craned their necks to look. The shorter officer blinked in surprise. The flight attendant's face went pale. David gave them a gentle nod. The taller officer swallowed and stepped back. "Sir, I didn't realize." His voice shook slightly. David smiled kindly. He turned to Aisha and offered his hand. "Aisha, are you all right?" Aisha stood, her dress falling softly around her knees. She placed her hand in his. Relief and pride filled her chest. "I'm okay, Dad," she said in a clear voice. A small smile spread across her lips. David lifted Aisha's hand to his lips in a quick kiss. Then he turned to the flight attendant. "Would you please explain what happened?" His tone was gentle but firm. The attendant's eyes flicked between David and the other crew. "Oh." She cleared her throat. "Sir, I felt the passenger was uncooperative. She did not make eye contact when I spoke to her." She looked down, ashamed. David nodded slowly. He looked at Aisha's calm face, then back at the attendant. "I understand that you have a job to do," he said softly, "but you must never judge a passenger by what you think you see. My daughter was polite and followed every instruction." He paused. "We must treat every person with respect and kindness. That is our company's rule." Passengers watched in silence. Some remembered whispering earlier. Now they felt the shift. The tall officer approached David. "Sir, I apologize for the mistake. We will report this and make sure it does not happen again." He bowed his head. David placed a hand on the officer's shoulder. "Thank you for understanding." Took Aisha's arm and guided her a few steps down the aisle, away from the attendant and officers. He nodded to the cabin crew, who took their seats quietly. A gentle calm flowed through the cabin. Aisha leaned into her father's side. "I was scared," she whispered. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "I know, sweetheart," he said, "but you were brave." The plane touched down smoothly, and the seatbelt sign dinged on. Passengers began to stand in the aisle. David turned to the flight attendant again. "Please remember today's lesson," he said in a kind voice. "Every passenger matters." The attendant blinked back tears. Yes, sir. I will. As the door opened onto the jetway, David and Aisha walked together, hand in hand. Fell among the passengers as they passed. Some nodded in respect, some offered soft smiles. Aisha's shoulders, once tense, now relaxed. She took a deep breath of relief. At the gate, Zara's voice called out, "Aisha." Her cousin ran forward and wrapped her in a warm hug. Aisha laughed with joy. David watched the two cousins embrace. His eyes glistened with pride and love. He bent down to Zara and held her hand. "Thank you for waiting," he said. Aisha looked back at the plane, then at her father. She felt gratitude and strength fill her soul. She knew she had been treated unfairly, but she also learned that kindness and truth would always win. As they stepped into the bright terminal, she knew that her story would help others find courage in moments of doubt. David led Aisha away from the gate area and into a quiet meeting room reserved for crew use. The soft hum of the air conditioning and the muted lights made the space feel calm. A few steps behind, the head flight attendant and the two officers stood with their heads bowed. David motioned them to sit at the long table. Aisha watched her father's steady hands rest on the smooth surface. David cleared his throat and spoke in a gentle voice that carried authority. "I called you here because we must learn from what happened today. Our airline stands for respect and dignity. No one should ever feel judged or afraid aboard our planes." He looked at each person in turn, the attendant whose voice had sounded so sure, the pilot sitting at the head of the table, and the two officers who had followed a report without full information. The head flight attendant lifted her eyes. "I saw someone who looked different and let my fear guide me. I did not think of her feelings, only of my own worry." Her voice trembled as she spoke. David nodded once, then leaned forward. "We all have fears," he said. "But as crew members, you have a duty to act with fairness. You must check facts before you judge. You are trained to keep passengers safe. That includes their emotional safety." He paused, then continued, "Starting today, I want new training. We will learn more about bias, how it can hurt people, and how to speak up when we see unfair treatment." The pilot flipped through a small notepad. He cleared his throat. "Yes, sir," he said. "I agree. I will arrange for workshops and role-play sessions. We will focus on empathy and respect." The two officers nodded. Their uniforms looked stiff, but their eyes showed relief. "We will review our procedures too," one officer said. "Want to ensure we treat every passenger equally?" Aisha sat quietly beside David. She looked at the attendant who had asked to inspect her bag. The woman's eyes glistened with tears. Aisha remembered the fear she had felt, alone in her seat. Now she saw a person who felt regret. She felt a small warmth for her, even as her heart still held some sadness. David turned to his daughter. "Aisha, would you like to say something?" His voice was kind. Aisha took a deep breath. She rose from her seat and stood beside the table. Her yellow dress caught the light. She felt her heart flutter, but she spoke clearly. "I want to say thank you," she began softly. "Thank you for learning from this. Thank you for wanting to change." She paused, then added, "I was scared when the officers came. Like I did not belong. But you listened, and you stood for me." She looked at each face. "I know you will make our airline better for everyone." The room was still. Then the head attendant rose and stepped forward. She placed her hands on the table. "Aisha, I am sorry I judged you," she said, her voice steady now. "I will treat every person with kindness, no matter who they are. I promise to learn and grow." The pilot and officers echoed their own apologies, each one speaking their promise to do better. David smiled with pride. He reached out and squeezed Aisha's hand. "I am proud of you," he whispered. She looked around and saw hope in each face. After the meeting, David walked Aisha to the customer lounge, where a soft sofa waited near large windows. Sunlight streamed in, illuminating the sleek floors. A small tray held water and fruit. Aisha sank into the sofa, breathing a deep sigh. David sat beside her and poured 2 glasses of water. He handed her one. "How are you feeling?" he asked gently. Aisha took a sip. Cool water soothed her dry throat. "Better now," she said. It helped to speak up. She looked out. At the runway below, planes taxied in silence. She thought of the ground crew and the people waiting for flights in other terminals. David nodded and folded his hands. He said, "I want you to know that your voice matters." Aisha felt her chest swell with pride. She glanced at her father's suit, the silver pin on his lapel that showed his company's logo. She remembered how he had appeared in the cabin earlier, like a hero in a story. They sat quietly for a moment, watching the planes. The hum of distant engines felt comforting now. Aisha's thoughts drifted to Zara, who must be waiting at the arrival gate. She felt excitement return, a gentle flutter of joy. She knew soon they would laugh and talk without fear. David stood and offered his hand. "Come on," he said. "Let's go see your cousin." Aisha took his hand and rose, her legs steady under her dress. They walked down the long corridor, their steps in sync. Crew members passed by with polite nods. Some offered quiet smiles of support. At the main gate, Zara hopped up from her seat. She ran toward Aisha with arms wide. "I missed you." Aisha laughed with relief and hugged her back. David watched, his heart full. He stepped forward and embraced Zara, greeting her like family as she was. They collected Aisha's suitcase at the baggage claim area. The carousel turned slowly, and soon it spit out Aisha's bright blue suitcase. Zara carried it with one hand, while Aisha held her cousin's shoulder. David walked beside them, offering his arm when they reached a taxi stand. As they stepped outside, warm sunlight bathed them. City air smelled of jasmine and coffee. Aisha glanced back at the airport entrance, then at her father. She felt a new sense of hope. The world could be unfair, but kindness and truth would guide her path. She trusted that others would learn too. The taxi arrived. He piled in and waved at the driver. As the car pulled away, Aisha watched the airport grow smaller in the distance. She turned to Zara and said, "Let me tell you what happened." Zara listened with wide eyes as Aisha began to describe the flight, the officers, and her father's arrival. David smiled in the back seat. He placed a gentle hand on her knee and said, "Your story will help others, Aisha. Remember that." Aisha nodded and reached for her notebook in her bag. She flipped open a fresh page and began to write new words. "Today I saw kindness win over fear. Today I found my voice." Aisha felt safe, loved, and hopeful. She knew the journey ahead would be filled with warmth and laughter. And she knew that from now on, she would always speak her truth, no matter how hard it might feel. ChatGPT said. A gentle hum of conversation filled Zara's cozy living room as Aisha settled onto the soft sofa, the afternoon sun pouring through the window. Plates of fresh fruit, sweet pastries, and steaming cups of mint tea waited on the low table before them. Zara, her eyes bright with excitement, poured Aisha a cup of tea and set it gently in her hands. Aisha cradled the warm mug, inhaling the soothing scent of mint and honey. She felt the last traces of worry slip away as the familiar comfort of her cousin's home wrapped around her. Zara sat close and asked, "How are you feeling now?" She brushed a loose strand of hair from Aisha's face. Aisha took a sip of tea and smiled. She pressed her lips around the rim of the cup and nodded. "Better," she said softly. "I feel safe here." She looked around the room at the colorful cushions and the framed photos on the wall, pictures of Zara and their families all laughing together in sunlit gardens and by the sea. Each image reminded Aisha of love and belonging. Zara leaned forward. "Tell me everything," she said gently. Aisha placed the empty cup on the saucer with a soft clink. She took a deep breath and began to speak. She described how the flight attendant first asked her to move her bag, how the attendant's eyes had watched her every move as if she were a stranger. She told Zara about the officers who boarded the plane, the way they folded her boarding pass and studied her face. She explained the tight knot in her chest and the tears she had fought back when they said she was uncooperative. Zara listened, closely, her hand resting on Aisha's. When Aisha reached the part where her father, the airline CEO, had arrived unexpectedly in the cabin, Zara's eyes widened. "Your own father?" she whispered. "Right there on the plane?" Aisha nodded. Her voice brightened as she continued. She told Zara how her father showed his badge, how the cabin had fallen silent, and how everyone's surprise had turned to relief. She laughed softly when she recalled her father lifting her hand to his lips, calling her brave. Zara let out a long breath and hugged Aisha tight. "I'm so proud of you," she said. "Ow, you are so strong." Aisha leaned into the hug, feeling grateful for Zara's warmth. She pulled back and said, "It helped me to stay calm. I kept thinking of Grandma's words. Speak only truth and stand only strong." Zara smiled and nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. After a moment, Aisha reached into her backpack and pulled out her notebook. She opened to the page where she had written her thoughts on the plane. "I want to write about this," she said. "I want to share what happened so others can learn." Zara's eyes lit up. "Yes," she said. "Your story can help people see what it is like to face fear. It can show how kindness makes a difference." Aisha flipped the notebook around so Zara could read. Together they read the lines. "Today, I saw kindness win over fear. Today I found my voice. Today I learned that respect and truth can change hearts." They spent the next hour crafting the story. Zara asked questions to help Aisha remember each detail clearly. They wrote about the sounds of the plane's engines, the hush when the officers walked down the aisle, and the soft click of the flight attendant's radio. They described the faces of other passengers, some curious, some offering worried glances, and how each moment had felt like a test of courage. Aisha wrote in simple words, honest and clear, until the notebook pages were filled with her journey. As they finished, Zara said, "You should share this on social media or with the news. People need to know." Aisha paused. She felt a flutter of nervousness at the idea of strangers reading her words. But she remembered how her father had used his voice to teach the crew an important lesson. She thought of all the passengers who had watched her, some feeling ashamed of their own quick judgments. She nodded. "Yes," she said firmly. "I will share it." Zara reached for her laptop from the small desk in the corner. She opened it and navigated to a simple blog site they used to write about family memories. Together, they typed the story, copying Aisha's handwritten words into the online page. They added a title, "A Journey Above the Clouds," one girl's story of respect and dignity. They chose a soft green background and a simple font so the words would stand out. Aisha uploaded a photo of herself at the airport, smiling in her yellow dress, her backpack at her side. Zara added a note at the end. "If you have ever felt unseen or judged, know that your voice matters. Speak your truth, and kindness will follow." When the post was ready, they sat side by side, and Aisha pressed the publish button. The page loaded, and the story appeared online. Aisha closed her eyes for a second and let out a soft breath. Zara wrapped an arm around her shoulders and said, "Now it will reach others." Aisha opened her eyes and smiled. Later that evening, as the sky outside the window turned a soft pink, Aisha and Zara prepared a simple dinner of rice, grilled vegetables, and spiced chicken. They ate together at the small kitchen table, their conversation light and warm. Aisha felt relief in every bite. The laughter returned, bright and easy, as they talked about school, family, and plans for the weekend. After dinner, Zara's phone buzzed softly. She looked at the screen and gasped. "Aisha," she said, "people are already reading your story?" Aisha's heart fluttered with excitement. Zara showed her the notifications. Friends' comments of support. Strangers sharing similar experiences, even messages from people thanking Aisha for giving them courage. A line from a woman in another country read, "Your words touched my heart. I felt seen." Another read, "Thank you for reminding us that respect matters." Aisha felt tears of joy fill her eyes. She pressed her hand against her chest and whispered, "Thank you." She thought of the flight attendant, the officers, and even those passengers who had watched and learned. She knew a small seed of change had been planted. She closed her laptop and stood, stretching. Zara sat back and watched her cousin with love. As night fell, the two cousins stepped out onto the small balcony. The city lights twinkled below like scattered stars. A gentle breeze carried the distant hum of traffic and the scent of jasmine from a neighbor's garden. Aisha leaned on the railing and looked out. She thought of tomorrow's adventures, visiting the old market, sharing coffee at a street cafe, walking through a park blooming with flowers. Zara joined her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Tomorrow we start fresh," she said softly. "Let's make new memories." Aisha turned and hugged Zara. "Yes," she said, her voice full of hope. "New memories, new stories." They stood together in the soft glow of the city lights, two cousins bound by love and strengthened by truth. Aisha felt a quiet joy bloom in her heart. She had traveled far that day, both in distance and in courage. She had faced fear, spoken her truth, and watched kindness bloom in unexpected places. And now, surrounded by family and the promise of tomorrow, she knew her journey had only just begun.